Hello, this is Let's Talk About Myths, baby, and I am your host, Liv. I am here today with a really, I suppose it's just got a bonus bit that makes it a very different style of conversation episode. I sat down with Joe Goodkin, who is a musician who is basically a modern Homeric bard. He has written like full albums worth of songs dedicated to the Iliad and the Odyssey, and they are fascinating and beautiful and emotional and stunningly beautiful work. Joe and I talked about Homer broadly. I mean, Homer as a person, as a concept. We talked about the Iliad and the Odyssey in a little more detail because how could we not? We talked about learning ancient Greek and just generally the classics as a field of study, as a thing that we both interact with and have made our careers out of in a way that isn't academia, and what that brings to the table when it comes to classics. Honestly, it was a really great conversation. It was just really fun. And then at the end, Joe performs one of his songs, which, is just utterly beautiful. So absolutely you want to listen to this episode, especially to the song at the end. It's just stunning. Conversations, singing the blues of Achilles. The modern Homeric bard, Joe Goodkin. So you describe yourself as a modern Homeric bard, right?
Yeah.
That's so fun. So how did you get into that? Because that's so wild.
Yeah, it is wild. I guess I was a musician first, going back to, I started playing guitar when I was in grade school and being in bands in high school, sort of more conventionally. And then when I got to college, I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison, sort of on a whim. I took some ancient Greek my first semester there for my language requirement. And I took it because I had seen some Greek words in a book in high school that had been left like untranslated. And I thought that was incredibly pretentious, but also incredibly interesting. And, the script, you know this, it's like almost like magic symbols or something. You see it and it's beautiful and it's mysterious. And so I thought, I wasn't enamored with any of the languages I really took before that in high school. And I thought I'll give it a shot. And it just sort of lit my brain on fire, this ancient Greek class. And by my second semester, I was taking Greek myth and I was taking Greek archaeology, and I was suddenly had this interconnected world that was becoming clear to me. And, my language class was connecting to my myth class, to my archaeology class. And then I was a classics major after that. And so I majored in classics, and really, really, ancient Greek was the thing that I loved more than anything, although I liked all the other stuff too. So I got a chance to read Homer in Greek, the Iliad first, actually, and then some of the Odyssey. And so I graduated with a classics degree, and I still wanted to be a musician. And I thought, well, maybe I can combine the two into one completely unemployable job, which is modern bard. I just basically thought I could replicate something of the original song performance of these poems in sort of a modern musical idiom. And I didn't really start it maybe the same way it worked with your podcast. I didn't start it thinking this would eventually become a big part of my job. I just thought maybe this would be something cool I can do. And it turned into something I liked. And then it turned into something I did largely for high school audiences and then for college audiences. And now, like 18 years after I wrote the first one, or 19 years, or almost 20 actually, I added a second performance piece based on the Iliad called The Blues of Achilles. And it's something that when we're not in the pandemic, I do probably 50 to 60 times a year. And even in the pandemic, I was able to do a bunch of virtual shows. Like it actually translated pretty well into all these classrooms that had become virtual. So
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of things in life, you just chase weird little things that are interesting. And but the language piece was really like my window into the classics was ancient Greek. It
Mm-hmm.
really did it for me.
It sounds so similar to how I became a classics major, which
Yeah.
is just that I liked Greek myth, so I did it as a minor alongside my English major. And then as soon as I was in like my first class, it was like, oh, I'm just going to take all electives in this anyway, so why am I not doing a double major?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, and then English connects so much because you have to read all the really old stuff, for good or bad. Like, there definitely we should be reading newer stuff in English degrees, but
Yeah.
everything from 300 years ago is just referencing Greek myth half the time anyway.
You get allusion and you get reception and you get tradition. All it connects, and suddenly you're better at being an English major because of your classical background, I'm sure.
Exactly. I do wish I had taken ancient Greek though, so I'm jealous of that being any kind of starting point. I'm working on it now, but it is very hard.
Yeah. Are you just doing it on your own, or are you doing it?
Yeah, really piecemeal. I have a wonderful professor out of the university here who just likes to help me and just read through some things. But yeah, it's just it's a stunning language, both visually and speaking. Like, it's just gorgeous. So.
Yeah. And then on top of that, I assume your goal is to just get proficient in enough to read any old text, but
exactly.
Really you want to read Homer. Like that's,
oh yeah,
that's, not to, everything else is wonderful, but it's like a level, it's almost like a language inside a language to do the Homeric Greek stuff. Cause the poetry part of it and the dialect part of it and just the big organic mess that is the Homeric text. Really, you'll get there. Just stick with it. It's worth it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've definitely been again, just sort of pronouncing out loud and then looking into each of the words, like with sections. And we started with Homer because why not? Yeah. Well, especially, when you're learning those things, it's easiest when you can find a bunch of names, because I'm so proficient in Greek mythology and in the varied ways in which they phrase somebody's name.
That's interesting.
That I can see that. And I get I would look at something and immediately be like, oh, that says Atreides.
Yeah.
They're talking about Agamemnon or Menelaus, And so those are things that I know well enough that it's helped in learning ancient Greek, which is also kind of added fascination to it.
Yeah, that's a great window in. And the other thing is I've seen certain models of learning ancient Greek that say it's good to start with the Homeric text rather than Attic because it has all the dialects in some way baked into it, Mm-hmm. So you're basically learning this sea of endings that, and you're going to eventually boil it down maybe to read Attic Greek for whatever purposes. But I think it might be a little more complex at first because of some of the weirdness of it, but it's probably in the end gonna get you where you want to go. I don't know if about faster, but actually get you there where you want to go.
Well, yeah, and since I don't have any goals or anything other than just I don't want to be looking at it and seeing utter nonsense, it's
right.
Great.
Utter nonsense.
Yeah. Gorgeous nonsense, but
nonsense.
It's hard when it's not even the same characters or anything. It's one thing to try to start pronouncing Latin on a whim, but it's a whole other to be like, well, what are these letters exactly?
Yeah, you're like, that's close.
Yeah, and then sometimes it looks close and it's not.
Well, you can find a lot of people getting ridiculed for their knowledge of what looks like something, or their lack of knowledge of what looks like something, I guess. When they try to do the fake ancient Greek letters of things.
Oh, yeah, so. That's good stuff. That's good stuff. Never vowels. They like to get rid of the vowels completely.
They think sigma's a vowel. That's a big
problem.
Yeah,
and the problem is so many of the vowels in uppercase look like English, and so if they want to fake Greek, they throw out the ones that are English looking, then there's no vowels left.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. All the Homer talk leads directly into you. So you started with the Odyssey, which is obviously something that I love because I live for the Odyssey specifically. Iliad is great, don't get me wrong, but the Odyssey is it. So why did you go with that one first?
I went with that one, I think, because I've been thinking about this a lot because I did wait so long to do the Iliad piece, and I was terrified of the Iliad for years of doing it. I think the Odyssey is sort of more suited for the modern brain, for one thing, and it's also it's a little bit easier. And I don't mean that as like a pejorative. Like it's it's there is some fun in it. It's a
Mm-hmm.
twisted fun.
It's definitely
Where,
more fun.
yeah, like the Iliad is just so heavy, and there's nothing but heaviness in it. It's beautiful, and a lot of times it's like a beautiful heaviness, but and also like because of the way I wanted to write, I guess, or it turned out that I wanted to sort of write in this first person song idiom. I found it much easier to get into the first person mindset of the characters in the Odyssey than the Iliad. I didn't know what to do with warriors on a battlefield, for instance. Like I
Mm-hmm.
don't have that point of reference, but I do know what to do with a kid going off into the world who's unsure about himself, or I know what to do with a mother that's dealing with that, and also the absence of Rusman, and I know what to do with a guy out there trying to get to his identity or his home. So I found it just much easier to slide into the characters, I think. And also when I was writing about it, it was right around the time of "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," and there was a great stage adaptation of it here in Chicago around that time by a wonderful director named Mary Zimmerman, who's done a bunch of great classical pieces. And so I saw it represented in these beautiful sort of modern ways, and I thought, that seems like I can take that on. It's more approachable, and I loved it, just like you. It was my first sort of like, oh holy shit, this is a perfect story. It's absolutely perfect, both in the way it's told and what it's about, and all these things. So that was why the Odyssey first.
Yeah. I mean, agree entirely. That's the thing with, the Odyssey I just find to be so fascinating, but it's exciting, and there's always something going on, and all the, the characters and all of that. And as much as there's so many problems, like people like to bug me about my love for Odysseus.
No, you know what? You and I, we don't. You should tell him to. You should tell him to go look in the mirror and see a little Odysseus in all of them. I think that's the problem. I really do. I've thought about this a lot. What's interesting to me about him is not right or wrong for the most part. It's humanity. Like it's the 360-degree parts of him, some of which are terrible, some of which certainly to like the ancient audiences that we think of as being sort of in the dark corners would have actually been commendable. Like I don't think the ancient audience would have had a problem with him killing the suitors, and probably not even the slave girls. Like that's what they deserved to an ancient audience, so now we're going to get hate mail about that, but
well, I do think if the audience had more women, they probably wouldn't have agreed that all the enslaved girls deserved it, because they really didn't. That one, but I mean, I agree with you with the audience. Like
the thing I'll say about that, because you're exactly right to push back on that, because there's definitely a distinction between the suitors and them, for sure.
And there's a few women who you can see are named, called out as like being deeply complicit with the suitors. You still have to like deal with the fact that they were enslaved.
They didn't have a choice, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then there are lots of them that are not complicit at all, and you're like, well, Odysseus, did you really have to kill all of them in such a horrific way?
Yeah, right. Well, he has to get to 12 somehow, I guess. And I've actually wondered, this is one of these things where I've thought about these stories, for years and decades now, and I just realized, like, within this month, that Achilles sacrifices 12 Trojan boys on Patroclus's pyre, and Odysseus, really Telemachus, kills 12 slave girls, like that 12. And I was thinking about, why does he get to 12? Like, why does Odysseus I wonder if that is a distinct line to what Achilles does in the Iliad. I don't know. That's the kind of speculation that we just throw up against the wall and say,
I mean, I'm with you. My brain immediately went to, okay, there's 12 Olympians.
Yeah,
so
right.
What's there? Like, what's that connection?
You know how to play the game.
Oh yeah, I mean, the level I live in this world, but like the things that can come to me on a whim at this point, it's the best.
The other thing about the slave girls, which I think is, and I love that, especially Emily Wilson's translation, brought the discussion's happening now, because I don't know if, I'm sure it wasn't happening when I read it, which is not that long ago, but long ago, for the first time.
I mean, even in university, for me, it was like 12 years ago now. The difference is huge.
Yeah, the difference is huge and important and great. Because what it forced me to do was, when I started thinking about that, I noticed things in the text, like when Penelope and Odysseus meet in the interview scene when he's disguised. She mentions the betrayal of the slave girls before anything else when she's talking to him. And his nurse brings that up. And, when he tells Telemachus to go kill them, he doesn't say, do it like as grotesquely and as uncleanly and as on top of the fact that it's a death, like really, really terrible, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Telemachus is like, I think I'm just going to take the lead here and hang. Like it's a team effort, I guess was, and it took me a long time to notice that
Mm-hmm.
there's something going on in the text with those slave girls, and it's not just about Odysseus. It's about this society. It's about like the household, and I think that's a really interesting conversation to have.
Mm-hmm.
At least I do.
No, I do think it's interesting because, I mean, it's fascinating and dark to think about how they would have viewed the people not in their employ, but like
Yeah,
in their possession,
yeah, exactly.
and like the level of required like allegiance to the family.
Deference, right? Yeah, right. Sure.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just, yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. And like Telemachus, I think, also has his own issues in terms of the level
Yes.
of what he's willing to do. Because,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like, you could have killed them without
Yeah.
it being the most horrific
Yes.
thing you could possibly imagine.
Well, but it's very much like, I think that's a perfect example. Like it's, what does it say about his character that he does that? Well, he's
Mm-hmm.
desperate he's desperate for his dad's approval now that he's
Mm-hmm.
back, and
Oh, yeah.
he hasn't had a chance to fight a real battle, so he's gonna give 120% to this task he's been giving, and unfortunately, it's terrible. So
Yeah.
I
Telemachus
love
is.
that discussion. That's great.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, Telemachus, I think, is a fascinating character in general
Yeah.
because, like, from the start, he
Yes.
is so many things. You know, he's like kind of weaselly. He's very whiny, but
Yeah.
he's also trying to prove himself. But
Yeah.
he's mostly like complaining about his mom.
Yep.
Like, you know, he's definitely he's a fascinating character. And then for that to be the sort of like the last major role he plays is interesting.
Yeah, and it's a real, like, again, this crosses over into what we talked about before, like how beautifully he's rendered in the story, and how like the psychology of how the text portrays him is so accessible, but also like complex, and like on first blush, it's awesome that when you read this in college, you're basically the same age as him, or even in
Mm.
high school. Like for like I perform for a lot of high school English classes as a freshman, and Telemachus is an awesome character for them. It's like they get him immediately because they're going through
Because
all
he's
the
a
same.
teenager.
Because he's a teenager, right? And I love that, when Athena appears to him for the first time, I think like the first three things she says to him are, "Hey, you did a really good job with that Xenia," which is kind of amazing that has never had a model for it and he's good at
Mm-hmm.
it. Like that's a
It's
nice thing
true.
about him. Nobody's ever shown him how to do it, right? He's watched these suitors do the exact opposite and he still does a good job, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
she says something like, "I knew your dad and you look exactly like him. You have to be his son." And like that's like a heartbreaking, beautiful thing to say to this 20-year-old that's never met his father. Like that's all he wants to know, right? Is like,
Mm-hmm.
was he really my dad, and is he alive, and then she basically gives him the confidence to go out into the world and start to move beyond the weaselly adolescent, and he's just an awesome character. I think it's a it's a beautiful job that's done with him.
I just think even I haven't thought this deeply into the Odyssey in a while, and it's so nice because it just reminds you how much like it's just such a fascinating and well plotted, like the characters are perfect, they're so complex and in depth, and it just, I think for me, and why it's my favorite, and it will be because this is sort of, it's the thing that opened my eyes to the complexity that exists in
Yeah,
ancient Greek literature, right? Like you read the myths, but you read them in retellings when you're
sure,
younger, or
right.
certainly I did, and the retellings are always weird and slightly troubling, and but then as soon as you actually get to read like an original text, which for most people I would say starts with Homer,
Yeah,
you're just, it's like completely mind-boggling to think that this intensely like personal, human,
yep,
universal, eternal, and
sophisticated, yeah,
well
yeah,
plotted, the characters are so drawn out and they're so intense and they're flawed, I mean, and that leads directly into the Iliad too, where they're so deeply flawed, you still love them all, but the idea that all of these things came out of an oral tradition,
yeah,
like not just written in 700 BC or 800, whenever, like,
yeah, but
but
stretching back hundreds of years before that, right?
exactly, and
Maybe a
told
thousand.
through, yeah, and told over and over, and
Yeah,
changed, and adjusted for the times and what was going on, all the different things you think about what could have come out of them, and then for them to eventually be, written down in this way. And
Well,
anyway, they're perfect, and I just want to talk about them all the time.
Well, they're perfect in a very different way from the way we use the word perfect with art. I think a lot
perfect
of times.
literature.
Yeah,
they're perfect literature, not like perfect characters or story.
Right. But they're also like, I love the way you lay that out, because it's really poignant and it's really moving to think that hundreds, if not more, years of humans created it through this tradition. It wasn't, most people think it wasn't one person, and even if it was one person, that one person was certainly the last train car in
Exactly.
this in long tradition, and was harvesting these 100 years of ideas. I mean,
he was the editor.
He was the stitcher,
compiler,
the stitcher, right? Yeah, the rhapsode, right? I think that's the feeling I got reading it. Was it you feel very connected to humanity, because you're just sort of waiting around in exactly what you described. And it's, I think, moving. That's what classics does to me in general, is I just feel really moved and connected to humanity, sort of without judgment, I guess, which is maybe a privilege, but you can add the judgment later. Like that's fine. But that's it in a nutshell.
Well, and I think judgment, can come in whatever way. Like, obviously I come at it with judgment, that's my whole brand, but it's judgment based. Well, it's judgment based entirely in a reverence for this, right? It's like,
right.
Like I think it's important to look at these stories and appreciate them for what they were, and then to maybe look at why they might require some judgment. Like, I'm not just judging them on the basis of like problematizing everything. I'm judging them based on historical things.
Right.
Like, why certainly the women are treated in one way in Homer, and why was that? Not like because Homer was a shitty misogynist, but because of like what existed around him, and that's what makes it interesting.
Well, and also, like, look, none of us come to it without judgment. Like, to say, to acknowledge the lens is great. Like, but there's or I should say not but, it can absorb all these different ways of attacking it. It can be all of them at the same time. That's the beauty of it. It's really, it's a really awesome thing. And I think, like, now luckily for us, now there's more and more perspectives available, and to see it through. And the more you can gather, the more complete picture you're going to get. Like, that's true of everything, I think.
So, I mean, just in relation to all of that, when you are, so the pieces that you turn into songs and everything, are those your own translations? And are you making like changes, or are they more of like a literal translation, but to make a song?
Yeah. So the pieces are a little different. The Odyssey one, the first one I did, they're both more like songs inspired by the episodes and language of. So I'm certainly mining, especially the imagery, the Homeric imagery, because you're not going to beat Homeric imagery if you're writing songs like evocative. You might as well just steal every picture that is in the text. So they're more like these little bits and songs where I'm trying to write it in a little bit more of like a modern idiom, because I want to have my cake and eat it too. I want the audience to both see the source material or get a sense of it, but also relate to it in a sort of contemporary way. I'm interested in, how do we generate songs, or how do we tell these stories in song in a way that we can create a parallel experience for our modern audience to the original audiences. And if I sang the text to them, because some people do that and it's incredible. Like, there's people that do more like recitation or like sort of setting, using the text as like a, I'm forgetting the word in opera, whatever the lyrics are in opera. But to me, like, I want the audience to feel through like a modern song the emotions that the characters are going through in the story. I want them to feel a mother who is having to let go of her child, worried about her child. And then I want them to know that it's Penelope, but I want them to get to that universal experience first, and then sort of add back in the classical part, because I feel like they're challenging stories to get to that. Sometimes there's a lot of weird things that happen, particular things that get in the way of connecting to the human experience. And I love the idea of let's ask what's human about these characters first, and then let's do the lens of like, why is this happening and why is this happening and what like particular Greek or Bronze Age or whatever is happening in there. So the lyrics are inspired certainly by the text. I used on the Odyssey, like I basically did almost like a comparative translation study where I had 5 translations and the Greek, and I just blasted through all of them, sort of jumping between them till I found a part of an episode, like a little nugget or like a little space to write into, or some moment that I thought this can be expanded into a 2-minute song or a 3-minute song. And it's not hard. Like there's there's a gajillion of them. There's too many, clearly. And I came up with 24 of those for the Odyssey performance. It's about 35, 37 minutes or so. And then the Iliad songs, I wrote them a lot later, but I had this experience of already performing this Odyssey piece already 250 sometimes at that point. So I wrote them a little more conventionally in terms of like they're these little 3-minute folk tunes or blues tunes or pop, folk pop tunes, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But there I also used a lot more. I interviewed veterans. I read a lot more sort of war literature on top of the Iliad text because I was really intimidated by the whole world of
Mm-hmm.
it. So they certainly like they acknowledge the text and they use the text as a tool or as an inspiration, or even sometimes just like, let's lift this image of an ember buried in the ashes because are you really going to beat that? No. But they're not literal translations. It's definitely, I'm trying to do a little meta, like have my cake and eat it too with that.
I think that, it's so much more suiting for the Iliad, I would say too.
Yeah.
Especially like I totally also get the evolution of yourself in what you're doing. Like identify with that in a major way.
Why is that?
Oh gosh, don't even get me started on my early episodes of this podcast.
May it never stop, as I said. Like if you're not always looking back a little askance at your old work, that means you're not trying to do it better. So
yeah, no, it's so true. But the idea of like I don't think that the Iliad would lend itself to a more literal.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing about the Odyssey, and what I think makes them both so fascinating is how different they are.
Yes,
like how
yes.
vastly
Yes,
different
yeah,
they are.
yeah.
Because the Odyssey is perfect for like a like a 40-minute song. That's amazing.
It's very modern. I mean, I know that word gets tossed around and it can mean a lot of things, but I remember, this maybe goes back to your first question. Like I just read the Odyssey and I was like, was this written yesterday? Like what the heck? Like it has everything. It's got flashbacks. It's got like sort of meta commentary on itself. It's got like, action adventure. It's got a sequel baked in. It's like, it's like what, like, and the Iliad it feels older. It feels a messier. I'm not sure it is. It just feels that, like, I'm not sure, like when you sit down and look at it, that it's, but I got that impression too. And maybe you did as well. Like it feels just heavier when you get inside of it. It's so heavy, and your heart just sags when you, in a good way. I don't want to turn anybody off from reading it.
No, the Iliad's incredible, but it is heavy.
Yeah. And you're actually right. I never thought about it like quite that way, but these little, that is a strength in trying to tell that the Iliad a little bit more so than the Odyssey. The Odyssey will sit a little more conventionally. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, even just like thinking of, I feel like this is just turning into a full discussion of comparative Homer, which is great. But I like thinking of the plot structure and the plot devices used in the Odyssey versus the Iliad is fascinating, and not something I've done super explicitly. But like you're saying with the Odyssey and the flashbacks and the storytelling, because you start with Telemachus dealing with all of that, jump to Calypso's island, escape from. Then we're 9 years in, escape from Calypso's island, and then it's okay. What happened in the past 9 years?
Right.
And that alone, that's just so fascinating because there's so many really like complex plot structures being utilized. And then in the Iliad, it's like, okay, we're 9 years into this war. This is what happens. This is happening in a very short amount of time for how long the war is. Yeah. It's just like bang, 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 epic, dark, heavy, and sad, and just all in one.
Time's so weird with the Iliad too, because, I think the actual plot takes place over 52 days in the Iliad, or 53. Sense. But really, like, I think most of the text is like 4 days, or maybe even less, maybe like 3. And it's time. And I think the Odyssey technically is fewer days. Like it's I think it's 40 some or something, but it doesn't, like, I don't even think about time in either one of those, to your point. Like it's almost like time is just distorted. It's time, and I love that something that occurred to me when you said that about the Odyssey. So when he gets to the Phaeacians, the bard there, Demodocus, is singing about something that happened even before Odysseus started to go home, right? It's like, how did they do it? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. I forgot about that bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's, maybe that's the little button on it is, I've read those poems. I can't tell you how many times between doing at school and then doing the writing of it, and then I try to read them like once a year or so, just because I know I'm going to be in front of people talking about them. And like every time I'm like, how did I not see this the first 40? Like, what is this really here? Like, this is, and it will keep happening for you. Like, it never stops. Your book where you make notes, if you do that, like, it'll just keep filling up with other stuff you see. It's like, it's amazing.
I have my copy from university with my notes, and I've been meaning to go back and reread that.
That'd
and
be
see,
fascinating.
Right? It just like, where I was coming at it from then. Whereas, specifically with the Odyssey, like I read Emily Wilson's for the book or for the podcast, but
you did Samuel Butler, right?
That's one I read like recited.
Yeah, yes. That was awesome though. But that was one that I had not used, like, and I never read it, and I was like,
there's no reason to, except for that for me it's public domain.
But isn't that fascinating? And like, there's a totally different rhythm to that translation than anything out there. Like, it's so wacky and beautiful and in its own little way.
That's like one of the best things I ever started doing, and that was fully because of the pandemic. Is I just started reading them, and
I thought that was so cool. It was really
I'm glad to hear that, because I loved it. I was like, I don't even know if you guys are listening to this or really like it, but like, I'm living for just reading it. And the Odyssey was fascinating because the Iliad, I actually had to like the episode lengths from reading just a book.
Yeah, too long.
It was like between. It varied too much or a lot. It would be like some would be 20 minutes and some would be 45 to an hour.
That doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Because what are they? Like, books in the Iliad are like anywhere from like maybe 600 to 800 lines or 900, 600. I guess maybe it does make sense they would vary that much. But
it felt huge, whereas the Odyssey, almost all of them are like just a tight 30 to 40 minutes. They're like exactly my episode length. It's perfect. Like, which is of course perfect because the Odyssey is my favorite. And it was just like, gosh, what a life.
But you know what, and this is probably, that makes total sense with the stories to me. Like the Odyssey is just like clipping along, like perfect. The Iliad is like this unwieldy, like lumbering, like, now it's going to take us long. Like that makes complete sense to me. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I just think about like how they would have approached it back then too, in the oral tradition of it, and like
how long were performances, and how like we
did they stop it? And,
right. How often were they interrupted by somebody else, and they had to stop it, and like it. Yeah, you get chills. At least I do.
Yeah. When it comes to the Iliad, then like obviously you're saying you played around with it a lot more, as I think you should, because the Iliad's such an interest. Like I wouldn't want to imagine necessarily coming at it more literally, because it is just so, it's just so many things.
Yes.
Like I don't want to pick a word even to describe it, because it totally depends where you're coming at it and how you're coming at it. So when it comes to that, so it's called The Blues of Achilles. So does it is it mostly Achilles, or did you sort of expand? What's the story there?
Yeah. So the Odyssey piece, I had done is heavily Odysseus, Penelope, and Telemachus, and really it's sort of heavily Odysseus. Like each one of those two characters gets a couple songs. I have a couple ancillary characters that get songs more to suit my like sort of intellectual take on it. So like Demodocus gets a song, and I'm trying to think who else gets. Athena gets a couple songs, even though I'm not as interested for the purpose of these songs with the gods. I think they're fascinating, but they don't sort of, if you're trying to talk about what's human about a poem, the gods sort of have to go off to the side for a second. I know there's arguments that they're the most human of the things in the story, but I feel like as soon as you introduce them to people, they stop believing in sort of the human emotion, because they're a little distracted by the fantastical stuff. And in
the Odyssey, they're a little more like, they're a little ancillary.
Yeah, much more.
Yeah,
they're the beginning, and then there's a little in the middle, and then there's a little at the end.
Yeah, there's like a little Deus Ex Machina, like a little bit of Athena pulling some strings.
Yeah, right. But it's really just her, and then a couple little scenes up there with Zeus saying, "Fine, now we can do it.
You're okay. It's okay that you do this thing."
Yeah. Whereas, in the Iliad, they're like, let's get out in the battlefield and and get this thing moving, right? So with the Iliad, I didn't know what I was going to do with that. I figured I knew I wanted to incorporate other voices, and I had this thought of like I really want to make sure I incorporate as many female voices as possible, because my impression was that female characters don't have as much to say in the Iliad as they do in the Odyssey. I don't know. I don't think that's actually true in some weird little way after having gone through this. And I think I'll tell you why as I talk about
please.
writing it. So out of the 17 songs I have, I think 6 are Achilles songs. And then there is one song each for Hector, Priam, Agamemnon, Patroclus. And then the female characters are Helen, Thetis, Andromache, Hecuba, Briseis, and Chryseis. So there's one more female character that has a song than male character. Although Achilles, as he probably should, gets like 5 or 6 songs. So
fair. He's got a lot to say.
He does, maybe a little too much. But I found myself so much. I mean, I'm fascinated with Achilles because he's fascinating, clearly. But I found myself so much more interested with how his pain and grief and anger impacts like this orbit of grief and pain and anger that's around him, of like everybody. And like, so writing the songs for those characters to me was really engaging, and I don't want to say fun, but like challenging in a great way. And you look and, how do you write a song for Chryseis who doesn't have a single line she doesn't say anything in the whole poem?
Oh my God.
And she's like and she's the thing that kicks it off. We couldn't have the
catalyst.
story without her, right? Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. I mean, Briseis, I think, says 2 lines, a couple lines. She mourns like when she comes back to Agamemnon or to Achilles, and he's just discovered that Patroclus has died, right? And she sort of says, Patroclus treated me great, and like she sort of starts mourning for Achilles because they sort of know he's going to die, right? So she's got a couple more things she says, but like these characters don't say a lot. So how do you write words for them first person? You have a lot of freedom. That's one thing. And if you believe, like you said, that these are sort of elastic myths, and there's a definitive version sort of, but the tradition allows you to find an emotional perspective and write it and and defend it. So that's what I was able to do with them. I was really surprised when I realized I'd forgotten that the end of the poem is essentially 3 women lamenting, that they get the last word for in some sense. So I and then Helen has like quite a bit to say actually, and she's a fascinating character, every bit as fascinating as any other character. Like, talk about like sort of weirdly self-aware, and like I don't know what's going on with her, but it's mysterious. And like to write a song from her point of view is awesome, because you just have you can do anything with her. Like she's an amazing character. So I was pleasantly surprised to find that there was more substance there than I thought there was, and then there was even more room for me to go in and try to speak and say things for them or that I didn't think they had said in the text. Yeah.
I find the Trojan everything in the Iliad so fascinating, because this is ostensibly a story about the Greeks.
Right.
It is like all about their heroes and their people and their origins and all of these things, and yet absolutely the best
most
and
compelling,
most compelling, most sympathetic, like the ones you're rooting for are the Trojans by and large. And then when it comes to picking out like objectively the best people in terms of like overall character, they're Trojans.
Yeah, maybe with the exception of Patroclus, but
sure,
yes.
but he's still a little. I would certainly argue Hector is over Patroclus in that way, but it's just such it's a
certainly of what's in the text, for sure, because just on book 6 alone, that's sort of the saying goodbye. That was one of the things that we read. One of the excerpts when we did Homer for the first time in Greek was we read most of book 6 or a big chunk of book 6, and like that's a scene that just the first time you read it, you never forget how the interaction between him and Andromache and the kid, you're just like, it blows your mind. Like the first time you read it, it's so beautiful and it's perfect in every portrayal and every emotionally, and what it says about the characters and what it says about the story and how it just immediately evokes what's going to happen to these characters. I mean, it's amazing. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? Those, like, specifically Hector and Andromache
Yeah,
are just
that's beautiful.
such compelling characters. And then I just think about the Greeks, and yes, like Patroclus, which is how I pronounce it, even though I'm probably not right, but I can't say it otherwise.
I screw that up all the time. I don't know,
I don't know what's right or wrong. But I'm gonna sound weird if I try otherwise. But basically, I think he is so compelling, but at the same time, I don't know. I find I have to weigh how I feel about him versus how I feel about the Song of Achilles.
Yeah.
And like whether I'm coming at him more objectively or just because I like that book a lot.
Yeah, you mean like
it's
that's like giving you something that's not necessarily in the text that you're
yeah.
romantic. You know what? I take that. That's a very that's a nice. I like that perspective. I will say that I don't know if you've read the book Achilles in Vietnam.
No, but I've heard of it.
Yeah,
And
that
it's on the
that
list. Yeah,
you should. Yeah, it's worth it because it lays out in the text all these little hints about how the Greeks thought of Patroclus, and you're not making it up. Like he is there's a lot of stuff in the text that would lead us to believe that he is indeed very special and, separate from the Song of Achilles, which is wonderful. So I would continue to go that direction with your Patroclus love. But
I mean, I certainly do. It's more just an interesting thing. And when I not obviously not when I read the Butler translation on the podcast, but when I covered the episodes in my narrative episodes, I had just finished Song of Achilles.
Yeah.
So I know it was so influenced by that, which is interesting. But I mean, and certainly he's an incredible character. And I think I have developed this love for Hector over time because he just is so thrown into this in a way that no one else really is, where he's just like, well, I guess I just have to defend like every single thing about my homeland and my people, even though
the only
I didn't
thing.
want this.
He's the only thing. He's the one.
Yeah.
It's he was a interesting guy to write from, for sure. He's they're all complex. Like that's the thing they're all complex. And the Song of Achilles was really important because I think she does exactly like what I was talking about, where she goes in and finds these little unexplained moments or things that and does just like such a beautiful job with it. And that's the way that it's supposed to work with these stories. You're supposed to get in to one version and then turn it into another version, and then somebody's supposed to do that with your version. Like it's it's the more versions the better, as many as possible. That's what the myth is the sum of the versions. That's what I think, at least what it should be.
I agree. And that's certainly always my intention when I'm researching these days, is to find all the little variations. And I just like to think about how and why they varied, and then things like that, because I think it's so fascinating. But it's such an interesting thing because I think that is, I don't want to say it's a minority view, but there are just so many people who seem to believe that these are like untouchable, that they are perfect in a way that deserves reverence and absolutely no criticism and absolutely no adjustments. It's a fascinating thing, just even being in that world and listening to that. Well, I don't really listen to it often, but it often comes screaming at me on Twitter. But otherwise, it's just it's a fascinating thing because I think that that's objectively incorrect.
Yes, I have nothing to add. I think you're right. And again, send your hate mail to whatever.
It I don't get that here. All my listeners are great.
Yes, I'm sure. Not all the people on Twitter, but all your listeners.
Exactly. No, Twitter is where the darkness comes.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
So, and when it comes to all of these things and like the sort of transformative nature of these stories and the myths. So when it came to the Iliad, I'm curious, because you focus so many stories on the Trojan women, did you consult with like perhaps the Trojan women at all, like the Euripides play?
I definitely was aware of some of that. And I guess what's interesting is I think I've performed it. I've done the Blues of Achilles actually only one time in person because I launched it in March of 2020. So you do the math, right? So I've done most of these performances virtually, which have been great because I've been able to perform places that maybe couldn't have otherwise, flown me out or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I've had audience members see parts of the tragedies, including the Trojan women, in what I've written, and sort of say like, "Were you thinking of this there?" And I'm sort of like, "Sure, I was thinking." But it's funny how you find yourself arriving at similar um, in seeing similar things to the people that clearly were using some of the same sources you were, and that's very, I guess, like, I don't want to say humbling, but it's reassuring to me. Like when I
Mm-hmm.
come up with something and then I see it that it's either in one of the plays, one of the commentaries, a modern piece, and I know that it just was something I saw. I love those moments. It's like it's reaffirming. Usually your thing has a little twist on it. It's not like you found exactly the same thing, but I certainly didn't mind like the tragedies in the same way I did, say, commentary on the Iliad, or really, like, I used like All Quiet on the Western Front and Slaughterhouse-Five, and a lot of I was really interested in trying to find a vocabulary just around the experience of war that would help me understand what was going on in the setting of the Iliad. It's really
Mm-hmm.
alien. It's really hard. It's really, on top of it being about ancient warfare, just like warfare in general. Like, I don't know what this is about. Like,
Yeah.
I it's strange and uncomfortable, and as it should be.
Mm-hmm. I like the idea of reading Vonnegut to get to
Yeah, that
things in the Iliad.
that book is Slaughterhouse-Five is so. The thing I took from that too is he does so much in Slaughterhouse-Five with the distortion of time in war,
Mm-hmm.
and trauma, basically. And I thought, like what I said about the Iliad, which is I had to actually go back and figure out how long the Iliad was, because I'd never
Mm.
sat down and figured it out, how many days it covers. And once I got read it was 53, I was like, that's crazy. I never would have thought it was 53. But like, there's some of that distortion of time that's clearly happening in the text of the Iliad as well. And whether that's like, sometimes it'll just say, and then there was a 12-day feast. And you're like, wait, what? That's just half line of poetry. And then there'll be, 2,000 lines on one little 5-minute battle, or what have you. So yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. And trying to track all of that is fascinating
Yeah.
because it really is so varied. And I wonder about things like the thing that's been keeping me up lately is thinking about sacrificing hecatombs
Oh yeah.
because it's horrifying.
Yeah.
And I've just been considering, like, do we think that they actually, like, on the regular sacrificed like a hecatomb of anything?
It's a
Because
lot of
it's
stuff.
so many
Yeah,
animals.
I know. That's a really good, that's really funny. Just like think about the logistics of it, right?
Yeah, like how long would that take? And therefore, how many days are you tacking on because they sacrifice like 12 hecatombs to the
Yeah.
gods or whatever?
How many is in a hecatome?
100.
100. I mean, I guess when you're trying to feed thousands of people,
Still, I
that's
feel like they do it on the regular.
yeah, a little too often for them.
Well, and I think, like, sure, trying to feed them, yes, but where do they find that
Where do
many
they find
animals on the
1,200 cows?
like
Yeah, right.
plains of Troy?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I guess that's like, that could just be a function of formula and epic, or
Oh
like
yeah, no,
like I
I
said,
definitely think it's a huge part. It's a formula of epic.
50
Yeah.
or 60,000 soldiers need to eat something. That's
But where are you finding all
yeah,
of them?
it's a good
It's
point.
all fascinating. I like to think of bizarre logistics lately, specifically hecatombs.
No, I love it. I'd never thought about that till you brought it up, and I'm like, that's a lot of cows, and
It's just so many,
it's a
and
lot
I
of
just
bones, and it's a lot of everything.
yeah.
Blood.
Also, I think I realized recently it's pronounced hecatomb, which makes sense because it's tomb, but it just feels wrong.
No, go with what you got.
I'm going to. Regardless, I think like it's yeah, I had to read it aloud so many times while reciting the Butler translation
Yeah, sure.
that I just kept thinking of it more and more, and just like the logistics of all of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fascinating thing in general too, because there is such a, I don't know how wide the debate is in terms of, actual academics on whether or not like there was an equivalent war. I think there was some kind of war probably, and that's pretty well agreed, but like an equivalent in scale is a fascinating thing to consider.
You probably, from researching, are more up in this than I am, but I remember reading about the layer of Troy that they think is corresponds with about the time of the Trojan War,
Mm-hmm.
1180, whatever it is. In Troy 7B or I don't remember, but
I don't
I
remember. I
remember
don't
I
know the
remember like
details on that.
my professor at school was like, yeah, like you go to Troy and the great city of Great Wall Troy, and you're like that's it. Like it's not very big. It's just this. So I guess that's how myths get expanded. Is it gets told over hundreds of years, and suddenly nobody's seen it, and suddenly it becomes Great Wall Troy. The walls were like
Mm-hmm.
13 feet tall, or whatever or whatever it was.
Poseidon. That's not very exciting at all.
Yeah, exactly. That's good. I mean, I'm sure many somebody's have written on hecatombs and the logistics of
I
that.
know. I
That
need to
sounds
look into it.
like dissertation upon dissertation, probably.
It's just fascinating shit, honestly.
Yeah, that's right.
But Troy in general, I mean, in the Iliad, and thinking about, the way that the stories would have evolved over time and where they got to where they are, like,
Yeah,
introducing characters and um the people that they wanted to emphasize,
right,
or to make connections to the regions, or because that's what so
right.
much of mythology is, right? It's like,
Yeah,
well, this
right.
changed because somebody wanted to make their region sound more exciting,
More
like.
or more powerful or more valid or right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think about that in terms of Theseus all the time, because
Yes.
he's such a shit. I don't know what the
Yeah.
hell that anyone was thinking, and like, but clearly, so much of it was about making Athens
Important.
feel impressive and
Yeah.
important. And so, but then I think about why they would have chosen all the things that he did. Like, Lord, he was not a great guy.
Yeah,
But
but you wonder when those work, like you said, when do those work their way into the stories? Did he just start
hmm
out as like this? So I saw a talk of a scholar from Stanford named Richard Martin, who's super important Homerist, and I'll probably get the details wrong, but the main detail was that the word hero from the ancient Greek comes from the word horos for boundary, like boundary of
hmm
a city. And so the idea is that, or it's connected to that somehow. So that the idea is that these heroes, the hero was not like a moral judgment the way we use the word hero. It was
hmm
literally somebody that helped you firm up the boundaries of your cities. Like it was exactly what you said. You're more
hmm
important, more powerful. You want to be associated with these people because they're survivors. They're that's they'll give your city power. They'll give your city prestige. They'll help you to survive. And I think that, and then when the other stuff works its way in, who knows? But
hmm
I think that's really interesting.
Well, and yeah, and the way that we've like changed the word
Yeah,
now, and then the way that puts.
colors. Yeah,
Yeah, it puts a different, like, whole pressure and story onto these people that wasn't the intention back then.
right.
And then, but I always like to specify that when I am, talking about heroes, and just like, we think of heroes as
Yeah.
this, but they were just.
Well, to tie it back to your Odysseus like thing, like look, take Agamemnon, Odysseus, and Achilles. Okay. One of them made it home and didn't get killed.
Mhm,
That guy won.
barely.
Right. Barely. I
Yeah.
mean, of those three,
Yeah.
like that's his look. Like he made it home and then he didn't get
Mhm.
killed by somebody. Like I'm gonna hang with that guy. Like that's I know that might be controversial, but like it's we have a different, we like you said, we use the word a little differently. I
Mhm.
think, but I like this, and I guess that goes back to my rant before about like I understand why people attach this moral stuff to it, and they should. That's what stories should do. They should provoke discussions. But like when we look at the actual stories, I don't feel the need to do that right off the bat. Like
Mhm.
I'm interested in um just the humanity of it. Like and then fine, like everybody get their lens out or whatever. In all seriousness about, because you and I both work sort of in like classics adjacent, not classics adjacent, because this is all classics,
But not academia.
less conventional,
Yeah.
right? Not
Yeah.
academia, exactly. But when I started out early on, I was my relationship to academia. Like I knew that what I'd written had some value, both. I mean, I knew it had value in terms of getting people into the material, which maybe is sort of the way you feel about what you do. Like I want people into the things that I think are exciting, and I want
Mhm.
my takes on them to be, it's not scholarship, but I want them to be informed by like intelligence around the issues as much as
Mhm.
possible. So I take a lot of pride in being able to get up in front of a university audience and talk about the stuff in a way that fits in. clearly somebody that got a PhD and is in academia is going to have a much deeper knowledge, you hope. But like, because we're having this big debate about the role of classics and who has access to it, and right, like this stuff is really, really important. It
Mm-hmm.
really, really is. And like, when I was in undergrad, we didn't have I'm going to go yell at some kids to get off my lawn after this. But no, when I was in college was right when the modern internet was sort of starting to rev up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have killed for the number of different ways to interact with the material that people have now, from
Yeah.
podcasts to Twitter, to having Emily Wilson on Twitter, just like doing comparative translation in tweets. It's like, it's commonplace now, but like that was impossible to find. Like you had to get a
Yeah.
book and do the thing, or have a professor or whatever it was. I was like, this last week, I was up in Alaska performing the Odyssey for the first time in person in 16 months. And I was reading my translation and I saw a word I wanted to look up. And I was able to just go to the text on Perseus Tufts, which is a Tufts website,
Mm-hmm.
find the word I was looking for and look it up on my phone. And I was like, I would have had to have two lobes and a dictionary, and like, it's so amazing, the access and the creativity around the material now. Like I said, whether it's podcasting or books or like poems or what, like it's just it should be exciting. People should be into it.
Yeah.
They should be excited. There should be really smart people. Like, it should also be written about in scholarly ways, and like that's almost like a separate issue. But they theoretically should all work together. Like, people you inspire to get into the material should go and study classics and become the professors, and who come to one of my performances, or don't, or start their own podcast, or like write their own. It's that's something I've always wanted to be an outcome of the work I do around it, is just get people excited about it. Like, there are some wrong ways to do it, but there's no one right way. And there's probably an infinite number of right ways to do it. Like, have a book, have a podcast, have a cool way where you sneak informed perspectives of heroes into some sort of, like, that's what this stuff should be. It's awesome.
It's so true. I mean, I went in like 2009. But so it's so similar, even though it was like, that started at 12 years ago. But the level of the difference in online access, we had
like
online.
that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right, just like
but
that.
Podcasts weren't a thing, or if they were, I had never heard of one.
Right.
And, like the level of, we had Google, but that sort of, it was it.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
right. The access to the text and everything has just exploded, and things like that.
Yeah,
and images,
and the means, the way you can interact with it, the fact that I have this podcast and that I have like all of the other things, that's still so new, even in recent years.
Right.
And at the same time, I've now been doing this podcast long enough that I have actually had somebody who sent me a message saying, I forget if it was that they had graduated university or were just like in their second or third year or whatever, but basically said, I still remember the time that my teacher in high school played your show and I first heard it, and then I went and now I'm in my classics degree, or whatever she was telling me. It was so lovely. It made me feel like I'd been doing this 105 years when it really has only been 4, but it was like enough that an undergrad could have, gotten to a certain point having heard my show in high school.
That's awesome.
It was like wild. Yeah. But I think that is so perfect. And the idea that you can interact with it in this way. And then my favorite thing now is that I have people like you, and then also academics and stuff, who are willing to come on my show and teach more things, things that I wouldn't know, or their specialties, or just the extra levels that are so easily accessible when people are willing to share is so incredible.
Well, and I'm sure you've had academics say this, like, your reach is you can add up a lot of dissertations to get to the reach of one of your podcasts. Like, and again, I'm not using dissertation as like a metric, I'm kind of joking, whatever, because it's not, they don't serve the same function. Dissertations aren't meant to be, but like if it reaches somebody and gets them into it, I don't really care. Like, it should be all good. Everybody should be happy with it. Like, that's, whether it's me or some other singing bard, or like, because there are some other ones who are wonderful, or a storyteller, it's a Canadian, Jeff Wright. Do you know him at all? Jeff Wright?
No, No.
Oh, he does the
No, I
Odyssey,
clearly need to.
Odyssey, the podcast. Yeah. And the Trojan War
Oh.
podcast. Maybe you do know
Oh,
him.
yeah. I didn't
Yeah.
know he was Canadian.
Yeah.
I think is what
Yeah.
threw me there. Yeah.
I mean, he's like, he's another guy who's using a modern, means to do kind of an ancient thing, and he does much more of the narrative thing. So I think it's exciting. I know there's a lot of downside stuff, and there's always downside stuff, but I think the accessibility now, like you said, that's just accelerated maybe in the last 5 years, certainly, gosh, if you go back 20 years, whatever, that's going to bear fruit like a little bit later on. It takes time for that stuff to work itself. You need people to graduate high school and go to college and get out, and you just hope that there's degrees there for them to get, and that that the discipline is there in some way, a reformed way, I think. But again, that's controversial too.
Well, but I think as long as there's this, still good people coming at it from the right way, it's going to remain. It's just going to remain in the form that it should be.
Yeah,
the less dangerous, less, white supremacist way.
Well, right. There's that book, like there's a book from the 90s written by a unnamed classical scholar named Who Killed Homer, which of course now anybody can look up. And it's like, to think that you could kill Homer is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like,
it's all the nonsense about like the right wing people who are like, oh my God, they're canceling classics. And you're like, no.
You guys know how long this stuff and what this stuff has existed through? Like to have the temerity to think that like it'll be fine. And I'm not saying that to be glib. I'm just like, look at the record of how this stuff has been passed on. Hopefully we find more stuff like and we find more stuff in other cultures with similar, because I'm sure it's there. We just haven't found it yet.
And the other cultures just need to be looked at. That's all that really needs to change. Is that we need to not focus so much on Greece and Rome that every less, the cultures with less whiteness placed upon them are completely forgotten. That's the key to it.
Yes.
It's just expanding classics to
exactly
mean
right.
Not Greece and Rome.
Right.
And but Homer's not going anywhere. Plato's not going anywhere.
Nobody
it's nonsense to suggest that. And what it is that it's reactionary.
Yeah, right.
Because people feel threatened because their whiteness is threatened.
Well, and because like people are for you and me, they're looking at things in different ways, and it's change, and that's a good thing if you are comfortable with that, and it's a bad thing if you're not, I mean, look what did these stories have to do to get to us in the 21st century? Like, you think we're going to get rid of this stuff? Like, I mean, writing was invented like for these to come to us. They're going to be okay. Like, it's going to be fine.
They're going to be fine.
They're going to be fine. Yeah.
And we'll just understand them better and in more complex ways. And isn't that awesome?
Well, and I hope I was thinking about, because, I have a real soft spot for like philological books that write about the language, clearly in Homer, but like really what we need more text. We need more archaeology around this stuff, right? Like, and it's clearly there, like it's there, but like maybe in 20 years they find an earlier existing text of it.
Could you imagine?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I can for sure.
Oh, it's like my heart.
I know, right? Or what if they find, like a set of vases that have these figures painted a little bit early with some of the early writing? Like, I have a friend who's a professor who does, the early writing on vases, because that's really where the first writing took place, right? And it's like, there's got to be more of that stuff somewhere that will help us figure out how it went from this oral tradition to the text.
What if they translate linear A and then somebody finds a big old chunk of something in that?
That's exactly right. Because it's there, right? I mean, Homer will be fine.
Yeah, definitely.
Well,
definitely.
and it's the reason I like ranting about it. No, is because part of what going through around, and I perform mostly like in colleges and universities, is I essentially get I get to spend a day in almost every classics department, not almost every, but hundreds of them, literally. And so, in real time, I get to sort of talk to people who are in the discipline, and I'm, it's fascinating, because it's part of it is wonderful, clearly, like, and the professors and the students, and it's also really hard, and it's gotten harder, and it's probably going to get even harder, over the next couple of years. But it's still like, I think it's also really important for it to be something, to be there as part of this ecosystem, and which includes you, which includes me, which includes, Madeline Miller, which includes Jeff Wright, which includes everybody. Like
Mm-hmm.
we make it's a weird sort of like, I don't know if it's counterintuitive, but like one of the other things I like about the myths is that like we're sort of both the subject and the object of them in some ways. Like they can't exist without us telling them, but yet
Mm-hmm.
no one of our versions is particularly privileged over one other one. So it's this
Mm-hmm.
awesome like sort of symbiotic relationship to me. That's, again, I keep coming back to the word, like really moving. Like if you think about
Mm-hmm.
it, it's just humanity's, we're just these sort of vessels for these stories, and there's my rant.
No, but I agree completely. And I think that's the thing that I love so much about the way I do my show now is talking about not only how many versions there are,
Yeah,
but why, or not necessarily why, but just basically telling the people that aren't deep in this world that the versions we have aren't necessarily the only versions that
no,
existed. And I think that's so
yeah,
important.
right,
Like
right,
the idea that any one source that we have is the official record on Greek
yeah,
mythology
yeah, yeah,
is deeply
yeah.
absurd. And I think that unless you're deep enough in this world, you don't
No,
realize that
no,
because
no.
it's not often presented that
Well,
way.
we live in sort of a a culture of documenting things, right? And definitive
Mm.
things. And it's like,
Mhm.
that's a very, very new thing. Like writing is 3,000 years old, right? Or maybe older in other cultures, but this writing, the Homeric poems, right?
Mhm.
Photography is less than 200 years old.
Mhm.
Recorded music is 100 and, some years old. Like, taking pictures of your food on your phone is really new. Like, I mean, definitive versions didn't exist for so much longer of humanity, and even then, the idea of a definitive version is stupid anyway, because
Mhm.
it's like that was
It's
just that
myth.
moment. That was just that
Yeah, there's
moment.
it's myth.
Yeah,
Like
definitely.
there's literally there's no definitive version of myth,
Yeah,
period.
that's it. You said it.
Yeah, it's all there is to
Oh,
it.
we finished.
So,
We nailed it.
yeah.
Well,
And yet they don't listen when I tell them
I
that, when they
know.
tell me Medusa was evil.
Well, yeah. Well, that's a
God,
whole other story.
I
Um,
know.
I mean, okay or not. Like, that's
It's
it.
like, okay, there's literally no evidence that she was evil,
Right.
but okay.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well, I
I
mean,
could
that's
go
why
on clearly.
that to try to bring the stories into performances too, to me, is, there's this illusion of, you know, uh, when you do a performance, even if you're performing the same words and the same music,
Mm,
that performance only exists in that moment for the people for whom you're doing it, and
mm-hmm.
that to me is, again, like, it's very poignant and moving to recreate that experience. I know we have writing now. I know the audience knows that I'm singing songs I wrote, although you could argue that I'm changing them every time. But really, like, the myths, the stories, the power in them was that it was just in that telling that they had that meaning for those people. And then the next time you do it, 99.5% of the details might be the same, but probably not,
Mm-hmm.
and even then, so
It's Game of Telephone, but
it is.
nice
Yeah.
and
But
beautiful.
nice and beautiful. And you're not in preschool, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if that game even really translates over these
I mean,
days.
you couldn't really do it in COVID, I guess.
Well, but I'm even thinking of technologically.
Oh,
Like telephones, they're not really spotty
oh,
anymore.
that's a good point. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so curious. It's so interesting, just even the tech things. Like
I was
we're
going to
talking
say,
about
you're on
the.
hecatombs and now you're on telephone. That's pretty
Oh my
good.
gosh! Right? Gosh, no. It's just so fascinating the way these things, though, like the speed with which these things change. Like
Yeah.
the
Yes.
idea that people are getting degrees based on my podcast is like a real thrill.
It's
But
fantastic. And that's the way, that's like, I mean, that's the way it should be. That's the
yeah.
way, like, that is part and parcel with how we got the stuff and how the stuff will get passed on. And it's like, it just needs to be devoured by whatever new uh, technological advancement, and the
Hmm.
stories will come out. The stories will live. It doesn't.
And they'll live, I think, by people who will look at them in a more, you know, like again, it's not necessarily that you need to judge them or
No,
take them apart,
they're
but to just be
provocative
able,
though. Yeah.
yeah, to be able to see beyond the things that the white men of 60 years ago have
Yes.
told you
Right.
have to see. Like
And
just to be able to look beyond the
well,
traditional understanding of them.
and to your point about that, like, just get into the text. It's all
Yeah.
there. It's
Yeah,
like to be able to, like you said, to draw people to the source. Like, And that's a very that's also like a very, I don't know what the right word is, but like going to the text and looking is the way to do it. Like that's in some,
Hmm.
that's the way you're supposed to do it.
It's so obvious, and
Yeah,
yet
right.
so much has been influenced
By the
by
interpretations, yeah, for sure. Yeah, the
exactly, and
framings.
and then the
It's a
way
good
that
point.
those framings up until, so recently
Yeah.
were explicitly old
Mm-hmm.
white men,
Yep.
and so just like expanding that and hearing from other people, and yeah, it's just it's an exciting thing, and just all around so
It is.
fascinating.
So this is a little piece of the Blues of Achilles, and this song is sung from Priam's point of view, and it is from Book 24, where he goes to Achilles to try to recover Hector's body, which, aka the greatest scene in literature history. And I make a joke about it. I say, if we had just stopped literature after this scene, we'd probably still be okay, because I think it's maybe. So this song's called "Hands of Grief," and it is Priam in Achilles' tent, trying to get Hector back. Well, I'm before you on my knees, kissing the hands of my grief. My son was cut down in the fighting, and your hands took him from me. He was strong as a lion, with a full head of hair. Now it's caked with dust and rotten, but I still see him everywhere. If he had listened to my warnings, maybe he'd still be at my side. He knew the risk but fought for glory. When he fell, part of me died. I don't have much more to give to a world that's bled me dry. I don't have much life to live, or many tears left to cry. So think of someone who you love, who might someday be like me. Grant mercy to my son's body, and put it in my hands of grief. Put it in my hands of grief.
That's wonderful. Oh my god.
Thank
Fucking
you.
Priam.
Thank you. I know
Ugh.
that was my window into this. Like you were talking about the, finding like, how do you get into that story? And I
Mm.
interviewed actually a Gold Star father who'd lost his son in Iraq. And I mean, I was speaking to Priam, like I might as well. And I thought, okay,
Mm-hmm.
like now I see a little window like into this world that's just human and not like specific in a way. And I'm seeing it in grief. Like I'm seeing in resolution of grief. And that was one of the first songs I wrote for it. And I thought, I it's always been my favorite thing ever. Like as much as I'm an Odyssey stan, like in terms of the narrative, like I've always thought Book 24 of the Iliad is just like the most jaw dropping thing ever. So yeah, that's Hands of Grief. And it's a beautiful song and a beautiful story. So there you go.
Mm-hmm. Oh, lovely. Well, I mean, the perfect piece to put in there.
Yeah.
Well, amazing. So where can people find more of your work and you in general?
Yeah. So you can check me out at both joesodyssey.com and also thebluesofachilles.com. And then there's a sort of a general hub for all the music I do at joegoodkin.com. I travel in non-pandemic times. I travel around doing this, both in the US and also sometimes in Canada. And I hope in the fall to go to Europe. Actually, I know
Mm,
you're going to get out there ahead of me, I think, to Europe.
hopefully.
Yeah, well, I'm looking a couple months after you, so I'm hoping if you go, then, then I'm hoping actually to get to play in Athens,
Oh,
Athens in Rome, and also in the Netherlands for a conference there. So I do, but I also do these shows on Zoom, and I'll probably will continue to, even though I'd like to do it in person, but the reach of doing it in Zoom is clearly pretty cool, and it keeps me working. And thanks a bunch for giving me the opportunity to come on. I really, like I said, I really am a fan of what you're doing, and you're. I'm glad we're all in the same boat, rowing the same way for the most part. That's a cool thing.
yeah.
It's really neat to watch it happen. It's very cool.
Yeah, I agree entirely. So thank you so much too for coming on. Yeah, it's just been so wonderful. I love seeing it from this like very like similar but different perspective of coming at it
Yeah.
from, songwriting and all of that. It's fascinating.
Well, and it, again, it's the myths are all of this stuff. It's all of it. It's
Mhm.
putting it all together. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you all so much for listening. Such a fun conversation generally, but that song at the end, oh my god, chills. You can kind of tell how I don't know how to phrase things in moments like that at the end where I'm like, oh my God, that was just so gorgeous. I didn't remotely know how to start a conversation back up after a song like that. I was just kind of sitting in awe and was like, oh, I have to form words now? What are those? Anyway, it's just utterly gorgeous. You can listen to so much more of Joe's work at the websites that he mentioned, all of which are linked in this episode's description. So I really hope you enjoyed it. I mean, how could you not? Thank you all so much. I am Liv, and I love this shit.